And good afternoon and welcome. This is episode 43 of Thursday with Charlie's. The Thursdays with Charlie. It's the 11th of March. And since it's number 43, our blessing of the Garces Center last week was episode 42, I brought over something to remind us of 43. You might not be familiar with it, but it's a little known Spanish liqueur. It's vanilla flavored, and it's called 43, or in Spanish, 43. It's a very delicious one. I always think of that when I think of 43, and I've been saving that bottle to bring over for when we got to episode 43. And you might recall that every time we do an episode, we always end up with a Latin phrase to have for it. And I was thinking last week when we did the blessing of the Garces Center, I was hoping to find a Latin phrase to use for that, and I didn't even have to look far. Father John McShane gave it to us. He told us during his little talk last week, Tempus Fugit. Tempus Fugit. Time flies. Time goes by so very, very quickly, and it's good for us to be aware of that. We'll remind you that our Tiger Masses continue at 6 a.m. on Fridays during Lent. We've already completed 3 of them. The 4th one is tomorrow. Stations of the Cross continue at 6 p.m. on the Fridays of Lent, and we look forward to completing those going up towards Good Friday. Remind you also, this weekend is when the time changes. On 2 a.m. on Sunday morning, the 14th of March, we become Nevada people move ahead an hour. We then equal what Arizona people are, and so we will be on the same time frame after 2 a.m. on Sunday morning. Look forward to that very, very much. You might remember also that when we blessed the Garces Center last week, one of the things we did was the blessing of Garces water, the Colorado River Holy Water, which includes turquoise chips in it, because that would have been recognized at the time of Father Garces by the Indian tribes. Turquoise was a sign of peace, a sign of health, and a sign of life. And those are all things that fit in very well with the message of Catholicism that Father Garces brought to this area: the eternal peace, the beautiful peace of Christ, good spiritual health, and eternal life with Christ in heaven. We mailed out this week, and you probably have received them today, or you'll receive it tomorrow, our 3rd letter for the year. We included in that letter a bookmark from the blessing of the Garces Center. Unfortunately, I have to make one correction. It says dedication with the bishop, but that's going to take place in October. But we did do the blessing. We thought the bookmark looked so nice, we'd share that with everybody. There's also a prayer card in honor of St. Joseph, whose feast is the 19th of this month. And in next week's show, we'll talk a little bit more about St. Joseph and the special indulgences available because Pope Francis declared this year a year in honor of St. Joseph. I note to you that we have the actual dedication of the Garces Center. Bishop George Leo Thomas will come down on the 10th of October, and we have something to add to that. I received a call earlier this week from Daniel Markham. Daniel Markham is about to become the author of a book called 52 Masses, in which he's going to travel to attend Mass and to interview the people in 50 churches throughout the country, the 50 states, Puerto Rico, and Washington, D.C. So that's where he got the title of the book, 52 Masses. And he and I had been writing back and forth, and our church got selected as the church to represent the whole state of Nevada. He was supposed to come in February of this year. We had set that up a year ago, but because of the virus, he didn't go out on his rounds of visiting the churches. So he was talking to me about coming later this year, and I mentioned to him that we had just blessed the Garces Center, and that we were going to do the dedication, and I talked to him about Father Garces, and I mentioned that the bishop would be coming down on the 10th of October of this year. And he said, let me look at my calendar and see when I had scheduled you for. And he looked at the calendar. He says to me over the phone, he says, I'm going to be there on the weekend of the 9th and the 10th of October with you. So we'll be part of this book that will be coming out next year. We're the church representing the entire state of Nevada, and our bishop will be here, and Daniel Markham, the author, will be here. So he'll probably be doing some interviews along with the dedication. We definitely look forward to October 10th, 2021 being a beautiful, beautiful day of celebration for all of us. We have one question that we're going to take up today. It came from one of our viewers. Why do Catholics light votive candles? And where did that custom begin? Well, it actually has a long and beautiful history. In the Jewish religion, the ancient Hebrews kept a light. It wasn't necessarily a candle, it was a fire light that was lit in the temple, and it was kept burning all the time. In fact, there was a whole class of the Jewish priests who were responsible for keeping the fire lit, keeping the light lit in the temple. And that went on for centuries. In the New Testament, we speak of Jesus as being our light, or the light of the world. And that shows up in several of the gospel passages, and Jesus is referred to by his disciples and by those who followed them as being Christ our light. In fact, during the Easter Vigil service, we actually celebrate with that phrase, Christ our light. So Jesus is the light of our world, the light of our lives. Very early in the history of the church, the custom came of keeping a light, a candle, some form of light near the tombs of martyrs, those who had died because of their profession of faith. And so the martyrs were the first to kind of get that sign of their place of death was marked with a candle, and it was kept burning and kept being relit if it should go out, and kept burning brightly. Later on, that was extended to all images of people who were revered. And so the idea of lighting a candle and burning it in front of an image of Mary or of one of the saints became a common custom. There was one particular candle, we call it the Paschal candle or the Easter candle, that has great symbolism during the Easter Vigil, the first Mass of Easter, as we bless the candle, and it reminds us of God encompassing our whole year. In fact, the numbers of the year are etched into the candle by the priest during the ceremony, and we ask God's blessing on the whole year. If you want to notice that we keep our Paschal candle out during the entire year, and it's burned during every baptism, and it's burned during every funeral. And if you look in our church towards the front, it's up near the tabernacle, a very large candle. It's a couple of feet high, and it's about 3 or 4 inches thick around. You can't miss it. That candle is used, for, like I said, for every baptism, every funeral, and it's a reminder of Christ's presence in our life. The other light you'll notice in the front of our churches is the sanctuary lamp. Ours is electric because there's a town ordinance that we cannot keep a flame burning in a building that does not have people in it 24 hours a day. So we have an electric sanctuary lamp. It's a red light. You'll notice it above our tabernacle in the front of the church. That's a custom in Catholic churches around the world, either a light or a candle burning 24 hours a day to show that the Blessed Sacrament is present in the church, that Jesus' physical presence in the form of the Eucharist is present in the church. Ours is electric, and you'll notice that burning above our tabernacle. It doesn't necessarily have to be red, but red is an idea that we kind of use in churches, that if it's not a real candle, we use a light that is shaded red. Used to be a rule in the church that the candles that are used in church had to be at least 51% beeswax, because they were considered to be the best candles. They were also candles that produced very, very little smoke, and so that was considered better for use in church. Pretty much now, the use of candles, it doesn't have to be the beeswax, although that is still a preferred thing to have. There are other candles that we use in the church. If we have a procession at night, if you've ever seen pictures of processions at Lourdes or at Fatima at night, people generally carry a lit candle with them as they walk in the procession. At baptism, we take a light from the Paschal candle, the Easter candle, the big candle, and we give it either to the godparent or, if the person's of age, to the person being baptized as a sign that the light of Christ is spreading because of baptism to one other person. There's probably no service in the church that is not done with at least a candle or a pair of candles burning. Sometimes they're multiplied so that there's two pairs. If you notice in the front of our church, we have the two candles on the altar, and we have two candles by the pulpit, so that we honor the Word of God with candles, and we honor the physical presence of God in the Eucharist with candles. You'll also notice there are two candle racks up in the front of our church, one in front of the image of Mary as Our Lady of Guadalupe, one in front of the image, the mosaic of St. Joseph. Again, they're electric candles because we can't have candles burning in an unoccupied church. But the idea of lighting a light, whether it be a candle or an electric light, before an image, St. Joseph or the Blessed Mother or any other saint, is a way of signifying that we wish we could remain there. We wish we could remain in their presence, speaking with them, speaking of them to intercede for us with God. But we can't because we have other things in life, and so we light the candle as a sign that we wish we could be there with them too, and it burns continuously in their presence. The idea of using candles at home, some people have the custom of lighting a small candle, a vigil light perhaps, in a glass container just before an image or a crucifix. Again, for the same purpose. We wish we could spend the whole time with that image or with what it represents, but we can't, and so the light burning there reminds us of it. Or sometimes people would light that candle when they're going to pray. It's a reminder to focus our mind, focus our thoughts on the light that Christ brings into the world. When we talk about St. Joseph next week before his feast day on the 19th of March, we're going to talk about the indulgences, the idea that the Church has given these certain prayers and certain activities, special help to us during this year of St. Joseph. And one of the things, or two of the things actually, that are suggested is that during this year of St. Joseph, we practice the corporal and the spiritual works of mercy. I figured it might be a good idea to just look at those. Over the years, two groups of seven corporal, bodily, physical works of mercy, and seven spiritual works of mercy have developed in Christian writings. They actually now are grouped together. If you were to read the Catechism of the Catholic Church, they're actually listed in groups of seven, the corporal and the spiritual. And they're beautiful things. And maybe we should just go over them briefly. I'll just mention these again next week in terms of the indulgence and the Feast of St. Joseph. But just a quick review. Let me read them first and then comment on each one. These are the corporal works of mercy that the Church says we should be practicing when possible. And they're things that have to do with our physical needs. So the first one, feed the hungry. The second, give drink to the thirsty. The third, care for the sick. The fourth, shelter the homeless. The fifth, visit the imprisoned. The sixth, clothe the naked. And the seventh, bury the dead. The corporal ones, like I said, pertain to our physical needs, and they're charitable works that we can find various ways, sometimes very creative ways to do. For instance, feeding the hungry, well, certainly there is the obvious way. You could be giving money to a food bank, you could be supporting that way. But even in the preparation of meals at home for your family, you're feeding the hungry, or perhaps inviting someone out for dinner with you, or inviting someone to your home to share a meal with you, buying a cup of coffee for somebody, treating somebody to something that they might enjoy as a way of eating and nourishing themselves. That's a beautiful way, and it is one of the works of mercy. Number two, giving drink to the thirsty. Well, maybe making sure that there's clean water provided, providing that in the summer's heat to someone who might need it. Sometimes it's contributing to charities that work to make sure that water is clean in our own country or in other countries. Sometimes just giving that drink to someone who wants it. We've had people sometimes come over, they're working at the church, and you can see their face light up and say, would you like a bottle of water while you're here? That's giving drink to the thirsty. The third one, especially in this year of the virus, has been very important. Care for the sick. Sometimes that's physical care, make sure they get medical care properly, but sometimes it's just being present with them, making sure that the sick are not entirely alone, making sure that they have someone who visits them or takes care of some basic needs around their house. The fourth, sheltering the homeless. Most people are not going to bring a homeless person into their house. That would be impractical in many ways. But making sure that charities that support the homeless are supported, making sure that the homeless have a place to go if one can be provided, is certainly an important work of mercy, of charity. Visiting the imprisoned. I have several friends who, for various reasons, have ended up spending time in jails around the country. And I've had the opportunity to go and visit them, and I'm sure many other people have done that. Father McShane, who was down for our blessing of the Garces Center, has a whole ministry going out to the prisons, several of them up in the Las Vegas area, and visiting with the inmates. It's been somewhat curtailed because of the COVID virus, but it's something he's done for years and years. When possible, I have visited my friends in prison, but sometimes it's not possible to do physical visits. Sometimes it's a matter of remembering to send a card or to send a letter. And sometimes the imprisoned is not because they're in jail, it's because they're imprisoned in their own home because of their illness or because of their lack of mobility or because of their lack of transportation. To not leave people entirely alone, that can be visiting the imprisoned. The sixth one over there, clothing the naked. Sometimes we have an excess, I know I do, an excess of clothing develops, and we don't want to just get rid of it. We want to make sure someone uses it. That's why our Colorado River Food Bank is a great source to donate to people, because they would donate it out to other people. St. Vincent de Paul store, we have one over in the Bullhead City area. It's a very good charity where they let people purchase the clothes at a very minimal price, and they're reused. They're taking care of their needs. Sometimes you can physically give an item of clothing to someone who needs it. And the seventh, bury the dead. We may take care of certainly paying for the funerals of our own family and sometimes of friends, but maybe it's a matter of also being present for the burial of the dead. Sometimes people don't want to go to funeral, don't want to expose themselves to the fact that somebody has died. It's been very difficult in this year of COVID because a lot of people either are afraid to go or have not been permitted to go to be at the funeral of someone they know and they love who has died. But nobody should die alone or should be buried alone. There should be some remembrance of them. Now, those are the physical, the corporal, the bodily works of mercy. The spiritual ones are also 7 in number, and the church likes to group things in groups of 3s or 7s because it kind of signifies a sense of completeness. This is a good, rounded, well-rounded activity. The spiritual works of mercy are, number 1, instruct the ignorant; 2, counsel the doubtful; 3, console the sorrowful; 4, admonish the sinner; 5th, forgive offenses; 6, bear wrongs patiently; and 7, pray for the living and the dead. Now, these affect spiritual things, although there is some connection with the physical in all of them. Number 1, instruct the ignorant. I used to sometimes throw that out at my sophomores in class, that's what I was doing. Every time I went into class, I was instructing the ignorant. They didn't always like it when I said that. But sometimes a person has questions, and ignorance is not necessarily a bad thing. Ignorance means that you're lacking knowledge that you could have. And if you're providing the knowledge that someone could have, you're taking care of that particular bit of ignorance. And sometimes it's good to know that we don't know everything. We need to have more knowledge. We need to have more information. It helps us from making snap and wrong judgments, rash judgments, I think we can call them sometimes. So instructing somebody, if you know something that somebody else needs to know, be generous in sharing that knowledge about spiritual things, about physical things as well. Counseling the doubtful. There are always going to be people who have questions that might cause them troubles. They're worried about things. They're worried about salvation. They're worried about how they're going to get by. They worry about whether things will work out in the end. Counsel them. Share your faith with them. That's one of the reasons why we shouldn't be ashamed or afraid to talk about our faith. You're not forcing it on someone else. You're sharing it to the extent that you have something that could benefit them. That's one of the reasons why people like Father Garces came to the missions. They wanted to share the faith that they had. The third one, comfort the sorrowful. We sometimes forget that when people lose someone they love or something they love, a favored pet, or even a home, a location, a family member that might be distant, it just affects them. And there's a sense of sorrow that maybe we can provide a little bit of consolation for. Sometimes it's just by being with them. I remember back in the 1960s when my father died, I was in college, and one of the other guys who was in college with me was actually a year behind me in college. He didn't know quite what to do, but we had a 3-day wake for my father. So every afternoon, every evening, for 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon, 2 or 3 hours in the evening, we had a wake where the family, my mother and I, and the rest of the family, we sat with my father's body in the funeral home. That was very customary at the time. And my friend from college, he didn't say anything to me, but every afternoon and every evening he came and he just sat in the back. And when I asked him about it, he said, this way, if you ever wanted someone to talk to, if you ever felt you wanted to sit down with somebody, I'll be here. And it was really one of the nicest things that I remember from that time in my life. And it was just very nonchalantly done. He was just going to be there to give me comfort in my time of sorrow. I think we can do that a lot for people, whether it be at a funeral home, at their own home, to go and just not leave them entirely alone. Doesn't mean that you move in with them or you force yourself on them. It means that you're there for them if they need you. The fourth one, admonish the sinner. Sometimes we're afraid to tell somebody that they're doing something wrong, or that there's something that they should stop doing because it could lead to doing something wrong. Sometimes they're in the midst of fighting a temptation. We can sometimes be the one who helps that to not go to its natural conclusion of something evil being done. And sometimes we can be the recipients of that when someone tries to dissuade us from doing something wrong. We can kind of take that and say that's meant well. It's God sending somebody into our life to admonish us from doing something that would be wrong. The fifth one was forgive offenses. Forgiveness is really, really difficult. When someone does something to us, it's hard to not think that it's done deliberately and it's personally against us. And many times, an offense is not intended. The person didn't know any better, or didn't know it would bother us, or didn't know it would work out that way. And sometimes there's no intention at all of hurting us. And forgiveness in that case, we have to come and try to realize that sometimes things happen. Sometimes people say things that if they would have thought about it, they wouldn't have said. And maybe that idea of being willing to forgive. I always tell people that we maybe can't succeed in forgiving everybody, but we always can try. And sometimes that's the best we can do. We can try to forgive the person, but maybe we can't do it right away. Maybe it takes time. Don't be ashamed or afraid if it takes time. That's kind of normal. The sixth one, bear with wrongs patiently. In some religious orders, the Franciscans come to mind. St. Francis would say that, this is true happiness if someone does something to you that you don't deserve and you really want to be angry with them. If you just bear it and say, I'm going to put up with it because it's what God is sending me at this time in my life. And he said that would be true happiness. I don't know if I could find happiness in bearing wrongs, but I think I can find a level of satisfaction that I don't have to respond to every wrong done to me with anger or with a reprisal against it. I maybe can just bear with it and go on, and hopefully it does not occur again, and hopefully the person learns that that's not a good thing to do, and hopefully we don't perpetuate it by doing it to someone else. The seventh one, pray for the living and the dead. How often we sometimes forget to remember not only those who are living right in the same community or household with us or parish, but those who have gone before us. I have mentioned, do you ever pray for the priest who baptized you? Do you ever pray for your godparents at baptism? Do you ever pray for the bishop who confirmed you? Do you ever pray for that neighbor that you remember, you met years and years ago, who maybe gave you a drink or gave you a snack or something, and you don't know what happened to them? They were there when you were younger. Maybe just a quick prayer for them. It makes us grateful, and it's good to remember the people who make up our lives, the living, and the people who made up our lives, those who have died. So that's a quick refresher on the corporal and the spiritual works of mercy. I'll say some more about them next week. Now, this coming week, a couple of things happen. At 2 a.m. on Sunday, we in Nevada move our clocks ahead 1 hour. We spring forward, so we'll become on the same time zone, time hour as Arizona, our neighbors over there. But also on the next day, the 15th of March, Nevada is going to go to 50% capacity at churches, at our casinos, at our restaurants, at our stores. It's a sign of coming closer to coming out of this pandemic. But the 15th of March is also a special day. You might have heard it mentioned, beware the Ides of March. And you might wonder what that means. The Roman calendar had 3 special dates each month. The first of the month was known as the calends of the month. The 9th of the month, or the 7th, was known as the nones of the month. Some months it fell on the 9th, some months it fell on the 7th. More frequently, it fell on the 7th. And the Ides are either the 13th or the 15th of a month. Most months it falls on the 13th, but March is one of the months where the Ides fall on the 15th. And the 15th, the Ides of March, the Ides of any of the month, whether it be the 13th or 15th, was considered by the Romans sacred to the god Jupiter, sacred to the leader of the gods. And so there were religious ceremonies that were only done on the Ides. But what made it famous in our minds, Julius Caesar was shown in a play by the same name, Julius Caesar, that William Shakespeare wrote. And in that play, as in real life, Julius Caesar was warned by a soothsayer, a fortune teller, in 44 BC that he would be assassinated. And he did not take it seriously, and in the play, Julius Caesar was on his way to the Senate on March 15th, the Ides of March, and the soothsayer had said, "Beware the Ides of March." And Caesar was on his way to the Senate, and he was assassinated by his best friend, Brutus, in the play, and of course in real life as well. Caesar was really assassinated there. That kind of clinched it, and the line, "Beware the Ides of March," it became a way of kind of warning people that there are certain dates that you should watch out for. Not because it's superstitious, but because watch out what's going on in the world around you. Beware of certain things. Don't take everything literally, and don't take everything as being, well, maybe this has no connection with that. A lot of things are connected. So beware the Ides of March. Well, it's time for our Pascal to visit us. And as usual, he brings us a message. This week, he brings a double message, because I did want you to see Father McShane's comment on Tempus Fugit. Time flies. But also for this week, we have Christus Lux Nostra. Christ, our light. A good remembrance of those candles that we would light. A good remembrance that Christ brings light to all of our lives. The world and our minds and our hearts and our souls would be in real darkness without Christ coming into the world. God bless you, and thank you so much for joining us today, episode 43.